I saw the signs, but I told myself it was nothing. For 8 months, a secret lived right under my nose, one that would shatter everything I thought I knew. What I didn't realize was how deep the trap had already been set. My name is Ryan, and I've always believed I had a good life. I work as an IT manager at a mid-sized company, the kind of steady job that pays the bills and lets me come home every day to my wife, Emily, and our quiet little house. On the surface, everything looked normal. Our marriage seemed stable, even comfortable. But somewhere deep inside, I started feeling that something was off, like the air had shifted in a way I couldn't quite explain. At first, I brushed off the small things. Emily was busier than usual, spending more time on her phone, sometimes stepping out to take calls in another room. She was often tired and distracted, and I told myself it was just work stress or maybe a little burnout. I kept thinking, it's nothing. She needs space. But those tiny cracks in our routine slowly grew, like a low hum that I couldn't silence. There were moments when I noticed her eyes darting away when I asked simple questions. Phone calls that ended abruptly when I entered the room. And the weekends, our time together, felt less connected, almost forced. I remember one Saturday evening, we sat across from each other at the dinner table, both scrolling on our phones, barely saying a word. The silence between us was heavier than the food on our plates. It hit me like a sudden chill. I didn't know where she was in her mind, and somehow I was outside of it. Still, I told myself to be patient. I believed in our years together and the promises we made. I didn't want to see the truth because maybe if I ignored the signs, they would just disappear. Maybe it was just a phase, something temporary that would blow over. But even as I held on to that hope, a small voice inside me whispered doubt. That voice grew louder, feeding on my restlessness and the strange distance that stretched between us. I wanted to confront it, to ask the questions that scared me most. But I was afraid of what I might find, afraid of breaking the life I had built. So I stayed quiet, hoping for the best while bracing myself for the worst. And I had no idea that while I was hoping, the truth was already slipping away from me. After weeks of feeling like I was living with a stranger, I started paying closer attention. I didn't want to admit it, but the little things kept piling up, like pieces of a puzzle I didn't want to complete. Emily's behavior was no longer just off. It felt deliberate, secretive. She locked her phone when I was nearby, kept her messages hidden, and started spending more time working late. Every excuse felt thinner, less believable. One night I stayed up after she fell asleep, scrolling through my own phone, wondering if I was crazy for doubting her. But then I noticed a few charges on our joint credit card, restaurants, hotels, places I'd never heard her mention. I tried to tell myself maybe it was a surprise for me or a gift for a friend. But the doubt gnawed at me, growing heavier every day. I found myself watching her, trying to catch a glimpse of the truth without asking directly. I noticed how quickly she silenced her phone when I walked into the room, how her smile sometimes didn't reach her eyes. I remember one afternoon when I accidentally saw a text pop up on her screen. Just one name, repeated over and over. I couldn't read the messages, but that one name was enough to ignite a fire inside me. The more I suspected, the harder it became to act normal. At work, I'd catch myself zoning out, my mind spinning with questions I couldn't answer. At home, I was tense, unsure if I should ask her directly or keep watching and waiting. The silence between us grew heavier, filled with things neither of us said out loud. I knew I had to find out the truth before it tore me apart. But I was scared of losing her, scared of what the truth would mean for us. So I started quietly gathering pieces of evidence, opening apps when she wasn't around, checking bank statements, looking for anything that confirmed the worst. Each new discovery made my heart sink deeper. I felt like I was standing on the edge of a cliff, afraid to jump, but knowing I couldn't stay where I was. The man I thought I knew was slipping away, replaced by someone I couldn't recognize. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but I held it all inside. The battle was only beginning, and I knew I had to prepare myself for whatever came next. The day I found the proof is a day I'll never forget. I wasn't prepared for how it would feel, the mix of shock, anger, and a hollow sadness that swallowed me whole. It started like any other evening. Emily was out late at work, or so she said. I sat alone in our living room, scrolling through her phone when she wasn't home. I told myself it was the last time I would do this, that I was just looking for answers. Then there it was, messages between Emily and another man, intimate, filled with plans and promises she never made to me. I saw photos, heard voice notes, and read words I never thought I'd see from my wife. The affair had been going on for 8 months. 8 months of lies, secrets, and betrayal that I'd ignored or failed to notice. I froze, the phone slipping from my hand. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why? How? Was I not enough? The questions hammered at me like fists. I felt like a ghost in my own home, watching a life I no longer recognized. For a long time, I didn't move. The pain was sharp and sudden, like a punch to the gut. I wanted to shout, to break something, to scream until the walls heard my hurt. But all I could do was sit there, numb and broken. I thought about confronting her right away, but fear held me back. Fear of what she would say, fear of what I'd do next. Instead, I sat with the truth, letting it settle in the dark corners of my mind. The woman I loved had been living a double life, and I was left with the wreckage. Even in that moment of despair, a small part of me refused to give up. I needed to understand, to find out if there was anything left between us. But most of all, I needed to prepare for the battle ahead. Because this wasn't just about a broken heart. It was about everything we had built together, now crumbling beneath my feet. As the night dragged on, I realized this was only the beginning. The deeper truth was still waiting to be uncovered, and I was about to learn just how far the betrayal went. After the shock of the affair, I thought the worst was behind me. But then the next wave hit: financial betrayal. I started noticing things that didn't add up: missing money from our accounts, unexpected bills, and loans I never agreed to. It was like a slow, sinking feeling that tightened around me every time I checked the bank balance. At first, I tried to convince myself it was a mistake. Maybe she was covering a surprise, or maybe I had overlooked something. But the evidence kept piling up: large withdrawals, secret credit cards, payments to places I never heard of. And worst of all, it became clear that the man she was seeing wasn't just taking her attention, but also draining our finances. The feeling of being trapped overwhelmed me. The house we'd bought together, the savings we'd worked years to build, it was all slipping through my fingers. I realized that the affair wasn't just a personal betrayal. It was part of a deeper, more calculated plan. A financial trap that had been set long before I understood what was happening. I felt powerless, like a man caught in quicksand, struggling to move but sinking deeper with every step. I wanted to scream, to demand answers, but the silence in our house was deafening. Emily acted normal when I was around, but I knew the cracks were there, hidden beneath her calm exterior. I kept thinking about how this had all started, how I missed the signs. I should have seen it: the late-night phone calls, the secret meetings, the sudden expenses. But hope had blinded me, made me ignore the truth. Now I was left with a ruined heart and a shattered wallet. Yet beneath the despair, a flicker of determination started to burn. I couldn't let this define me. I couldn't stay trapped in someone else's game. I promised myself that I would fight, not just for my heart but for my future, for the life I deserved. This was no longer just about love. It was about survival. After the financial betrayal hit me like a freight train, I realized I had to keep it together, at least on the surface. I couldn't let Emily see the chaos raging inside me, not yet. So I put on a mask, going through the motions of work and home like a man walking on thin ice, afraid to fall. Every day felt like a battle between my heart and my mind. I was drowning in anger and sadness, but I forced myself to smile, to act normal around friends and family. No one could know the truth, not yet. The shame of being blindsided weighed heavy, and I was terrified of looking weak. But beneath the calm, I was quietly gathering strength. I started digging deeper into our finances, tracing every suspicious charge and hidden expense. I contacted banks and checked documents I'd never bothered to review before. Every discovery fueled my resolve to reclaim control. At work, I threw myself into projects, using the distraction to keep my mind busy. The routine gave me a small anchor in a sea of uncertainty, but nights were the hardest. When the house was quiet and the weight of betrayal pressed down, I allowed myself to feel the pain I'd been hiding. I cried alone in the dark, questioning how things had come to this. Yet even in those moments of weakness, I reminded myself why I couldn't give up. This wasn't just about Emily anymore. It was about my dignity, my future, and the life I wanted to rebuild. I started making plans, not impulsive or reckless, but careful and deliberate. I needed to protect what was mine and prepare for the difficult conversations ahead. I knew confronting Emily wouldn't be easy. There were too many emotions tangled up in this mess: love, anger, betrayal, regret. But I also knew I couldn't keep living in uncertainty. I had to face the truth head-on, even if it meant breaking apart everything I once held dear. So I waited, watching, learning, planning. Because sometimes the quietest battles are the hardest fought and the most important. I couldn't keep holding it in any longer. The weight of secrets, lies, and stolen moments was crushing me from the inside. One evening, I decided it was time to face Emily, to demand the truth, to break the silence that had grown between us like a wall. I remember how my hands trembled as I sat her down at the kitchen table, the same place we once shared laughter and dreams. My voice was quieter than I expected when I finally asked the question that had haunted me for months. Is there someone else? For a moment she looked away and the silence was deafening. Then came the confession, the words I wished I could unhear. She admitted everything. The affair, the money, the lies. The betrayal spilled out like poison, burning every part of my heart. I felt everything at once, anger, sadness, disbelief, and a hollow emptiness. I wanted to scream, to shake her, to beg her to explain why. But the words stuck in my throat. Instead, tears streamed down my face, tears I'd held back for so long. She tried to explain, to apologize, to say it was a mistake. But no excuse could erase the months of deceit. I realized then that this wasn't just a moment of weakness for her. It was a choice she had made over and over again. As the night went on, we talked and fought, our voices rising and falling like waves crashing against a cliff. The woman I loved was still there, but so was a stranger, a version of her I couldn't recognize or trust anymore. When it was over, the silence returned. But this time it was different. It wasn't the quiet of ignorance, it was the quiet of something broken, something that might never be fixed. I didn't know what the future held, but I knew one thing: nothing would ever be the same again. After the confrontation, I felt like I was standing in the ruins of my life, staring at what was left of something I thought was solid and true. The betrayal had torn everything apart, but somehow, I knew I had to start putting the pieces back together, even if it meant rebuilding alone. The days that followed were some of the hardest I've ever faced. I wrestled with anger and heartbreak, but I also searched for answers. Why did this happen? What had I missed? Could I ever trust again? Each question felt like a weight I carried everywhere I went. I started spending time alone, away from the house, trying to clear my mind. I took long walks, went back to old hobbies, and even started journaling to get my thoughts out. It wasn't about forgetting Emily or what happened. It was about understanding my own feelings, my own worth. Slowly, I began to see things more clearly. The betrayal was painful, but it didn't define me. It was a chapter in my life, a dark one, yes, but not the whole story. I realized I had to take control of my future, no matter how uncertain it seemed. Financially, I started meeting with advisors to understand my options. I wanted to protect myself and make sure I wouldn't fall into the trap again. It was a steep learning curve, but with every step, I felt a little more in control, a little less like a victim. Emotionally, I leaned on close friends who knew parts of the truth. Their support reminded me I wasn't alone. I was learning that healing doesn't mean forgetting. It means accepting what happened and choosing to move forward anyway. I didn't know where this road would lead, but I was ready to walk it. I was no longer just the man who was betrayed. I was becoming someone stronger, someone who could face the future with eyes wide open. By this point, the fog of betrayal was starting to clear, but I knew that healing wasn't just about feelings, it required action. I couldn't let my life be dictated by someone else's choices anymore. It was time to reclaim control piece by piece. I began by taking a hard look at our finances, meeting with lawyers and financial advisors to untangle the mess Emily had left behind. I learned more about money and legal rights in those weeks than I ever thought I would. It was overwhelming, but with every document signed and every account secured, I felt a little stronger. At the same time, I worked on myself. I started exercising again, something I'd neglected for months. The physical effort helped clear my mind and gave me a sense of accomplishment. I also reconnected with friends and family I'd lost touch with, realizing I didn't have to face this alone. The hardest part was setting boundaries. Emily and I still had to communicate, especially about the house and money, but I kept my distance emotionally. Every interaction reminded me of the pain, but I stayed firm. I had to protect my heart while I rebuilt. Slowly, I started thinking about the future, not just surviving, but living. I made plans to move forward, to find happiness on my own terms. It wasn't easy. Some days the weight of what happened threatened to pull me back, but I kept pushing, reminding myself that I deserved better. Reclaiming control was messy and painful, but it was mine. For the first time in months, I felt a flicker of hope. It wasn't a happy ending yet, but it was a new beginning. Just when I thought I was gaining ground, life reminded me that healing isn't a straight path. The past came crashing back in ways I hadn't expected. Old memories haunted me, and new obstacles threatened to pull me down again. Emily wasn't ready to let go quietly. There were legal battles over the house and finances, and every meeting felt like reopening old wounds. I had to fight to protect what was mine, but it also meant reliving the betrayal over and over. It was exhausting, emotionally and mentally. Then there were the moments alone, when silence filled the rooms and I was left with my thoughts. Sometimes the loneliness was overwhelming. Doubts crept in. Was I strong enough to rebuild? Would I ever trust again? Those nights were the hardest, when hope felt fragile and the pain felt close to unbearable. But through the darkness, I remembered the strength I'd found earlier. I reached out to the friends who stood by me, letting them help carry the load. I leaned on my routines, work, exercise, journaling, to keep moving forward even when I wanted to stop. I also started to forgive myself, not for what happened, but for the moments I felt weak, for the times I doubted. I realized that healing isn't about being perfect. It's about trying every day, even when it hurts. These challenges tested everything I'd built, but they also showed me who I was becoming, a man not defined by betrayal, but by resilience. I was learning to face my past without letting it control my future. Looking back, I realize how far I've come. The man who sat in silence, broken by betrayal and trapped by financial ruin, has begun to rise again. It wasn't quick or easy, and some days I still feel the sting of what was lost. But I'm learning to live with the scars, not as reminders of pain, but as marks of survival. I found new strength in the lessons I never wanted to learn. Trust, I now know, is fragile but worth fighting for, starting with trusting myself. I've rebuilt my life on clearer ground, setting boundaries that protect me and making choices that honor my worth. The house, the money, the past, they no longer hold power over me. I'm focused on what's ahead, new goals, new dreams, and the chance to create a life that's truly mine. Most importantly, I've found peace, not the kind that erases the past, but the kind that lets me move forward without being weighed down by it. I've stopped waiting for closure from others and started giving it to myself. This journey wasn't just about betrayal or financial traps. It was about rediscovering who I am when everything falls apart. And now, I'm ready to live fully again, with my eyes wide open and my heart guarded but hopeful. Because sometimes the darkest storms bring the brightest dawns. And for me, that dawn is just beginning.